Risk of Rain 2 and Enter the Gungeon are roguelike games that use the allure of randomly generated loot to draw the players into the gameplay loop over and over again with a different experience on every playthrough. Each game's loot drops in a different way that leads to the impact items have on the overall direction and difficulty of each of the games. Enter the Gungeon and Risk of Rain 2 have several different ways to pick up items. In Enter the Gungeon, every floor contains two chests that can be opened with keys. Keys have a 5% chance to drop after clearing a room, or they can be purchased on the shop. In the shop, the player can use the currency they gathered along the way to purchase items. In addition, after being the boss of a floor, the player will be given an item. In Risk of Rain 2, chests are scattered all throughout the level and must be purchased using credits that are given by defeating enemies. There are dozens of chests that spawn in each of the level's rather large environments, making finding all the chests rather hard compared to Gungeon's 2 chests per level. This leads to a situation of while you've gathered fewer items in Enter the Gungeon than Risk of Rain 2, a singular item in Enter the Gungeon tends to have a larger impact on your playthrough than a singular item in Risk of Rain 2. Each game's characters play a role on how items affect each playthrough, due to Enter the Gungeon's characters being very similar to each other, and Risk of Rain 2 characters having very different playstyles. In Enter the Gungeon, all characters start with pretty bad weapons you'll want to swap out right away, and their starting passives are also not very impactful, such as the Hunter having a 5% chance to get an extra common item drop per room. These starting passives will be quickly overshadowed by many of the passives items you pick up. In Risk of Rain 2, the player chooses one of several characters with different moves that all control their own unique way, making the characters select have a huge result on the type of playthrough that you'll have. Where an item may be useless on one character, it can be very powerful on another, such as the Bustling Fungus, which only heals you when you're standing still, but can be used by the engineer to create success since their turrets stand still. With the way characters control between the two games, then comes into play the way both games use their loot. In Enter the Gungeon, loot is separated into 3 main types of loot: passives, actives, and guns, while Risk of Rain 2 only has 2 types of loot: passives and actives. First, I'll describe the less common active items that you can get in both games. In either game, under most circumstances, you can only have one active item at a time. In Enter the Gungeon, active items are found in the same chest as all other types of items in the game, meaning you have a better active item when you find a second active item, you'll just leave the second active item behind. Risk of Rain 2's active items are their own special containers that lead players to ignoring the active chest once they've gathered the active item that best suits their needs for that run. In Enter the Gungeon, you can only shoot one gun at a time, and if you aren't out of ammo in your best gun, then you might as well keep on shooting it. While passive items are constantly working, and there is no limit to how many of them can be working on the player at the same time. This makes it so that in a Gungeon run where you pick up multiple great guns, you won't be using all of the loot, maybe wishing you had picked up more passive items instead of guns. In Risk of Rain 2, your attacks are based on the character you choose in the beginning and will not change throughout the run. Due to this, Risk of Rain 2 is designed with all of its items being passives, so you know that every time you open a chest, you won't need to worry about switching out another one of your items, compared to Gungeon, where you may need to account for if your current gun is more useful. This makes it so that all of the loot you picked up during your run will be used at all times, since the main type of loot in this game is passive items. Due to these loot systems, the game's balancing works in different ways. In Enter the Gungeon, the player has full view of all obstacles on screen at once due to its top-down view, as enemies all have telegraphed attacks, giving the player time to react and dodge the attack. This stems from how the player cannot use all of their loot they've gathered at once. The enemies must be balanced in a way that all of the loot the player has gathered isn't helping them at that moment. In Risk of Rain 2, the player will constantly be getting new items, while an individual item might be a smaller power jump than in Enter the Gungeon. The game is balanced around constantly gaining power. In order to match this balance, Risk of Rain 2's difficulty infinitely scales with how long the game is played. Enemies come out in swarms and attacks come out instantly, leading the players into a situation of if they haven't powered up enough, the difficulty scaling of things will make it impossible. In conclusion, Risk of Rain 2 and Enter the Gungeon's loot systems drive the loop of the game to give the players a different roguelike experience. In Enter the Gungeon, players are less likely to become all-powerful reckoners of destruction on their enemies, due to picking up less items and not getting to use all of their loot at once. While Risk of Rain 2, the player gets to use all their loot at one time, making it they can steamroll through the game when getting good loot. Enter the Gungeon's difficulty is balanced around the idea that not all of the items the player is picking up are going to be useful, so the player will still have a chance against the game's challenges even if the loot they picked up isn't the best. While in Risk of Rain 2, due to the infinitely difficulty scaling of the enemies, if the loot a player picked up isn't good or they haven't picked up a lot of loot, the game will be impossible to beat.